Welcome to Framework. I am John, one of the hosts of Framework, and with me, as always, Al, the other host of Framework.
Yeah, that's me. I'm just a modern happy guy. Is what I'm going. The character I'm playing today. We actually have a third party here as well. Sort of our Professor von Franz of our podcast.
I like that.
Yeah, Mr. Brett Blake. You joined us to talk about horror stuff mostly.
I do.
Or The Last Jedi, I suppose, was the first time we had you on.
Or Christopher Nolan movies. Yes. That's my forte. That's my corner of the cinematic world to talk about.
Yes, all of the darkest elements of our society coalesce around these things. Repressed Victorian sexuality and bloodletting, nuclear Armageddon, and of course Star Wars fandom.
That's not a bad sum up for just about any year these days.
The axis of evil of our times.
Yeah.
So anyway, we're here to talk about Robert Eggers' Nosferatu.
The big holiday hit, the big Christmas hit.
Yeah.
Shockingly.
I can't believe it. We've been making fun of this release date for it feels like a year, and nope, huge hit. $100 million. Big movie. Who knew?
What was really remarkable is that this is exactly what one might, if you know who Robert Eggers is, that name means anything to you. This movie is exactly what his Nosferatu would sound like it was going to be. And that's not necessarily the family hit of the holidays, but except for this year. But yeah, this is what I can't imagine anybody going into this with anything like an open mind and not appreciating it or liking it. Like, it's just like, why did you bother? If this is what it's so exactly what you signed up for.
I mean, I guess there's like, an element of this where it is sort of an elevated horror thing. It is fancy and artsy and slow paced and deliberate in the way that turns off some horror audiences. This is a different film than, say, like the Smile movies are, working in a different way.
Sure.
But it is also the most accessible Robert Eggers film. It's got to be.
Definitely.
It is just Dracula. It is basically, the plot is Dracula. It pretty much fulfills every promise the trailer makes, for sure. This is the movie that you're signing up for, no question.
I mean, the most accessible Robert Eggers movie is an interesting laurel to vie for, because, yeah, I guess this is relative to The Witch, faster paced and has more incident packed into it. There's more vampire action than there is witch action in The Witch. The Lighthouse is 2 hours of Cedric Diggory farting on Willem Dafoe in black and white. So, yeah, this is more commercial than that. And The Northman, Northman has some like action-ish elements, sort of, but almost to the point where it's a bait and switch. It's probably going to piss you off if that's what you signed up for.
Unless you're me, but yes, that's why I think this one is. This one feels like he was trying for a slightly bigger audience, I guess, and obviously it was a success. And a success of marketing too, I think. And also, I think fortunate there was just nothing in theaters right now for this audience.
For adults,
its competition is Sonic the Hedgehog and Mufasa. There was no Avatar this year for anyone older than 13 to go to. So. Not that this is the great teenager film of the year, but it's for adults at least.
It's got to be those things that more than him trying to make this more accessible or more commercial. It's more that you're right, that there was a lack of competition, and it's just gotten to a point where he has built up something of a personal brand.
I think also there's something sort of inherently about the fact that since this is Dracula, there's such a cultural understanding of what that story is, that it is a more accessible sort of story to grab onto than any of his previous films. I mean, The Northman is pretty straightforward. It's a revenge story, basically, but even more so than that film. If you know at all anything about Dracula, you're going to be able to follow this plot. Like, there's nothing that is too opaque. There's nothing that, motivations aren't difficult to understand, really. It's straightforward in that sense, and it's a canvas for Eggers to just sort of present this cinematic vision for us to experience.
Yeah, I mean, I guess he had dabbled in you know, remaking IP before with the Hamlet story in The Northman. But you're right that the Dracula story is a lot more infused into our modern cultural consciousness in its particulars, plot beats and whatnot, than Hamlet is.
Yeah, the structure, an opening act of a real estate agent going to Transylvania. The vampire comes back to where the real estate agent came from, and bad things happen. I mean, it's a simple structure, but it works, and it's a durable structure. I mean, obviously the book is about roughly 130 years old. There have been countless film adaptations in the past. People sort of know what it is. So the appeal of a new adaptation, whether it's called Dracula or whether it's riffing on the illegal Dracula adaptation that was the original Nosferatu, the appeal is, what are we going to see that is different visually, or what is going to impress us in terms of the craft? And I think that is where this film really just kind of floored me.
Yeah. The look of this thing is kind of the first thing that I think you have to kind of acknowledge as like lights out incredible, right? I mean, just the overall design aesthetic, from the way it's shot to the way it's lit to the way they're dressed to the look of Warlock to the entirety of it is just such a complete experience. It's so fully thought out.
Coppola's Dracula is artsy in its own way.
Totally.
But in a very different direction than
this. And I think that's probably the most like just culturally successful Dracula, going back, I don't know, at least 50 years.
Yeah, I was going to say the last 50 years. Sure.
Yeah. That's the only one I remember like being a hit and having, the people at school talking about. I mean, for the time I was in school, I don't know what competition it had, but like, this feels like Oscars. It's kind of hitting the same. Yeah. It had a cultural footprint. This kind of feels like it might be doing the same thing. It certainly is as precise and deliberate a visual aesthetic that is being approached.
I think they're companion piece films. I mean, I think they're approaching the material in a very different stylistic way, but they're both, sort of exuberant celebrations of kind of the craft of filmmaking, just in different ways.
Yeah, I like that.
I find it easier to apply the word exuberant to the Coppola version than this version.
Coppola's is much more bombastic and overheated and, over the top.
Anything.
Yeah. Which I love about it. I love that movie. But yeah, this is, I wrote a review of this for Letterboxd. And in that review, I described, I talked about kind of the kinship between Bram Stoker's Dracula and Nosferatu. And I described the Coppola movie as a hot-blooded film, and this is a cold-blooded film.
Oh, very much. What's interesting to me about that comparison is that this movie, the thing about Coppola's Dracula is it is the sort of ultimate example of the sexy Dracula thing.
Yes.
There's different versions of the Count throughout that movie where he's more or less desiccated, more or less of a beast, but eventually he's Gary Oldman in his like pickup artist getup, prowling
90s sunglasses. Yeah.
Yeah. And this movie is as sexualized as Coppola's in a way, but it's very deliberately not making the monster sexy.
I mean, yes, he's a maggoty corpse.
There's a horniness to it. Don't get me wrong. But it, look, and I this is something I'm citing as a positive to this. I'm at this juncture of life and culture. I don't really need a sex positive Dracula movie. That's not like what I'm in the market for. And Eggers, of course, is sort of, he goes to the beat of his own drum and he goes this other way. So, I mean, but what's interesting to me about this is that drinking blood and sex are just as intertwined in the Eggers version as they are in Coppola or Anne Rice or whatever, but sort of in the opposite directions. So, like for Gary Oldman or the Anne Rice vampires or whatever, the thirst for blood and flesh, it's sort of a method of seduction. They want to drink your blood as a vehicle towards fucking you and sexual possession.
Pure metaphor in those. Yes. This is like, well, drinking blood is fucking, obviously. Yeah.
But in this version, Orlok preys on the character's repressed sexuality sort of as a means of consuming their flesh and drinking their blood. Like
the sexual component in Nosferatu is much more threatening than the way that the sexual element is depicted in Bram Stoker's Dracula, where it is, I think, intentionally erotic. I mean, you can't have like a topless Monica Bellucci writhing on Keanu Reeves and not be going for a very specific intended effect. I mean, that's intended
in the
to be,
90s.
that's intended to be steamy. That's intended to be titillating.
Mhm.
There's nothing in Nosferatu that is intended to be a turn on like that.
Right.
Like everything sexual is uncomfortable and unpleasant and nothing that most normal people would want to partake in.
Well, I think this goes to sort of the Eggers philosophy and his approach to these old stories is that they are kind of the result of the culture that spawned them, and this culture was sexually repressed and terrified of sex, and kind of viewed it as the devil's work and just sort of a mark of our sin and our fallen nature as human beings. Which is, a pretty popular way to view sex historically. So
for Northern Europeans,
yes, right.
the last several centuries, yeah.
So that is a part of the vampire's evil, I guess you'd say, is that it brings that out of you. It gets you on one of your weaknesses, human frailty, as it were.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting about that, though, is that in terms of Robert Eggers, he does not feel like sort of an artist of his cultural moment, really.
No.
Like that's his whole project. That we live in a very postmodern time where everything's very meta and self-aware, and there is nothing deconstructionist about Robert Eggers' takes on any of this horror material. He's a reconstructionist.
Yeah.
He does these horror movies that are period pieces, but their aim is to be entirely devoid of irony or anachronism.
Yeah, products of the world that created them. And I mean that's the whole cool thing about it. Going back to the witch, it's just like, well, what if there was a witch? What?
Yeah.
But also, like, it is from a culture that would. Why would this culture believe in witches? What are the things inherent to Puritans in the 1600s? That made them think there was an old lady in the wood who was in Congress with Satan, and go from there. Start from there. Find the world that exists in folklore, and put that on screen. It's kind of a brilliant idea. No one really does that most of the time. Even the old British folk horror kind of comes from a bit of a modern perspective on it.
Yeah, well, it's in the modern horror environment. He strikes me as about the only one I can think of who seems hip to the idea of using sincerity as a weapon in this way. I don't know. Maybe. I think this is like a big Secret of the Exorcist, for example, or maybe Hereditary.
That's a good call.
Mold.
Yeah. I don't know if Ari Aster does. I don't know if I agree with that. I think he's ironic a lot of the time.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I guess Hereditary struck me in the moment as being like, oh, this really is like
it takes it seriously enough.
Yeah, it's not a metaphor. There really is an evil cult and a demon possession angle to it. But I think just since we go back to the 90s, Scream really injected horror with that winking self-awareness that now has been sort of co-opted by superhero movies to a degree, I suppose. But that era of horror gave way to elevated horror, which the three of us talked about a couple months back at length. But what we talked about in that episode is kind of those allegorical pretensions. They're a form of self-awareness.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
And Eggers resists that, even though we lumped him in with that whole movement.
That's interesting. I think what you were saying about sincerity and even sort of like a connection to The Exorcist. I think what would connect Eggers' approach to, say, the approach of William Friedkin and William Peter Blatty on a movie like The Exorcist is they're just accepting this as this is happening. This is real. We're not going to apologize for depicting it as real. We're just going to say, this is the world. This is the scenario. This is how it is. And now we're going to let the story play out under these parameters.
Yeah, I I didn't expect it to go straight to The Exorcist here, but I guess that is a very, it has a lot of similarities when you get right down to it. Not only in, well, also in just how it's been received, I guess. This is kind of a hit right out the gate, and I think like a classic right out the gate, if I'm reading the tone of people correctly. I think this has got to be his biggest film at this point.
Oh, definitely.
And it's, I mean, where do you go from here now? This feels like almost a moment. I'm shocked that this hit as hard as it did, but I'm also a little surprised, beyond just kind of box office wise, that people are embracing this as cleanly, because it's such a challenging film in a lot of ways. It is deliberate and slow, and yes, it has the Dracula framework to lean on, but at the same time, it is still a Robert Eggers film through and through. It is exactly the film I would anticipate if you told me Robert Eggers is directing Nosferatu.
Well, yeah, that's a thing that I would note, is that the surprise around this is all around the reception. There was nothing in this film that I found surprising. Like I said, it's exactly what it says on the box. From the director of The Witch and the Northman presents Nosferatu, and I don't know if I love it as much as well. I'm sure I don't love it as much as John does, because this is he's really throwing heat right across your plate here. But I don't know. I think, but it's not. I'm not trying to knock Eggers with this. It's more just the Dracula stuff is so familiar now that there is really no surprises left there for that. I could be impressed with the craft, but never really have my hair blown back by anything.
Well, this is actually, you bring this up, this is my issue with Nosferatu, the film. It is, and I mean, it's a small one. This is, I went and saw it a second time because I honestly wasn't sure whether it was my favorite Robert Eggers film or my least favorite Robert Eggers film. I find those generally hard to rank, and they're all really closely bunched together, but I wasn't sure, because it is not surprising. It is Dracula. It is the exact story, and not just the story of Nosferatu. It's like more Dracula than it is Nosferatu, which is a fine hair to slice. But I think that in the end, this is basically just a Dracula adaptation with some names changed. And that said, I kind of did feel myself ahead of this all the way through.
Yeah.
To the point where I was like, well, okay, well, it's about time we heard from Willem Dafoe again, and there he is. There was not much room for surprise. And maybe that's just as a student of horror movies, a person who's seen many Draculas, seen all the Eggers films multiple times. Maybe I'm harder to hit with something like this, and that's why it will end up being his biggest movie. But yeah, I'm still not sure where I would rank this for him. But it is definitely the most most conventional.
I'll say, let's return to the question of ranking in a bit, because I had to have a note on that. But yeah, I think the movie also really leans into the predictability aspects of it. There's a couple of points where Orlok announces you have 3 nights, and on the 3rd night you will give yourself to me, and in the intervening 2 nights you will see everything you love. It's like, there's only so many people in this movie, so it's like, I'm going to kill them, and then on the 3rd night you're going to do me thing. And then reading the thing about in the book about how the virgin sacrifice must embrace the count for a daughter. It's like, you're just reading forward in the screenplay at a certain point, and it's like, this story is already so familiar. I'm not sure that. Right. I mean, I don't know that you would have surprised me by anything necessarily anyway, but
they tell you exactly how the movie's going to end 30 minutes before it ends. Yes, they do. And I mean, knowing Nosferatu, kind of that's where we're headed, but they're very explicit and like, yes, we will go do a fake thing while you do this thing, and that will end the film. That's exactly what happens. Which, again, you're adapting literary classics. There's a limit on what you can do. It does seem they put a bit of a fine point on it here.
Yeah, maybe they underline that too much. But on the other hand, I don't know how much I really want to be, quote unquote, surprised, at least in terms of storytelling, by a Dracula adaptation. That's kind of,
be tough. It would be tough. Yes.
It's not really what I would be looking for from a new take on that book. And in fact, having said that, what I what I was impressed with here, and what was a bit of a surprise, was the degree to which some of the key characters felt closer to the Stoker characters than a lot of pure Dracula adaptations titled Dracula have felt. And that was unexpected for me, and I appreciated that. And I think that's one of the things, even beyond the sort of the cinema of it, beyond the filmmaking, that's what's going to keep Nosferatu elevated pretty high in the ranks of Dracula adaptations, for me at least anyway. The way that Orlok is depicted visually here is very close to how Stoker describes Dracula. And I think it would have been easy for Eggers to say, well, I'm technically doing Nosferatu. The last couple times, the previous two films that are called Nosferatu both feature kind of a similar look for the vampire character, sort of the classic Max Schreck look. And then in the Herzog version, Klaus Kinski did a version of that. It could have been easy to say, well, we're going to do another variation of that. But instead, he chooses to go closer to Stoker visually. And
he's a reconstructionist. That's,
yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think even more important, and maybe we'll talk about some of the performances now spinning off this. The Ellen character, Lily Rose Depp's character, who is the counterpart to Mina in the novel. I think she emotionally is as close to the character from Stoker as has probably ever been in any one of these movies. Because what's always struck me about Mina in the novel of Dracula is that, yes, there is this hold, there is this psychic sort of sway and increasing influence that Dracula has over her, and she is powerless to resist that. But she's cognizant of that, and it disgusts her and frightens her, and she is concerned about what that means for the people around her. And all of that is in Ellen's character in this movie. And I don't think any other Dracula adaptations have ever included sort of that dynamic in that way. Usually what they've done is a lot of these Dracula adaptations bring in the lost love or the reincarnated love story, where Mina is almost like she's almost ready to be cheating on Jonathan, even if Dracula never showed up. Like there's a sense of dissatisfaction or whatever. And I think that's kind of like borderline character assassination of a really interesting character that Stoker created. And I think Nosferatu gets it right.
I do like that they have a real relationship and a real marriage in this one. That the Harker Hutter character, whatever, is sort of, the Ur-Cuck of all of Western civilization. But in this is one of the, the version, as opposed to the sexy Dracula versions, where it is a relationship that the movie wants you to root for a little more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and it's even in the text. We get the prologue where Ellen, at some very low emotional, psychological point, sort of is calling out for some kind of comfort, and we realize that she is sort of awakened Orlok in some sense. But then there's a period of time where her need for that connection has been filled by her husband. They have a genuine connection. They have a genuine relationship. She is happy. And it's only when he leaves and sort of re-encounters Orlok for himself that is severed.
Yeah, she does. They do make note that her spells or whatever stopped when they got together for a while.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And Orlok has sought out Hutter, right? Like he is orchestrated the entire thing.
He's been laying the groundwork
as an external force, He got
through Herr Canuck.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, is this a way to get into the performance reviews? Because I would love to start with Simon McBurney as Eric Canuck.
Why not? It's a good place to start.
Maybe my favorite part of this whole movie. I don't know.
It's a great performance.
Sure
it is excellent, excellent character here. One of the best Renfields. I'll always have a soft spot for Tom Waits.
Tom Waits, of course.
But this is more, this is a more classic version of the character and kind of perfect. I love his first scene where before he's
Yeah.
out and out crazy, because he's still a little crazy in it.
You can tell something is not right, but he's functional enough.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, this is a right, down the middle Renfield. He's not bringing anything that new to it. It's just cranked up really high, and it's such a committed performance. I guess it brings more. He does feel a little more dangerous than some other Renfields.
Yes.
That are just sort of raving in a locked room.
And he's not goofy,
right?
As Renfield often is.
He's a touch.
He's a little goofy. He's a little goofy when he's there's a shot where he's prancing down when he escapes. He's sort of like prancing down the street, and it's like,
that's true.
But that's goofy in a way that I like. Like it doesn't feel tonally out of place. It feels like, well, sure, this character would behave that way right now, and I like that.
Yeah, there's not a ton of room for goof in a Robert Eggers production, but this character and this performance finds what's there available, and also he bites out someone's carotid artery to make his escape.
He's genuinely sinister when the movie needs him to be.
Yes, yeah, he seems like a guy who's really into the devil and into death and really wants to eat the heads off of birds. And God, that there's a funny moment actually. Like, my good man, why would you do that?
Yeah. Oh, another favorite thing I got from this movie: way more Ralph Ineson than I expected from that actor or character.
Very happy to see him here.
And I mean, this is kind of like, he's just a really dependable character actor. This is not like a showcase role. He really brings a lot to it, though. He's great. Dr. Severs, Ralph Ineson.
Really, that's the character. He's just really dependable doctor. He's not without fault because he's an 18th century doctor that is not, or 19th century, I suppose, 18 years. But his methods are questionable in some ways, but his intentions are fine. And in the non-Robert Eggers 2024 Nosferatu, that is trying to be, I don't know, I guess a little more strident with its it's postmodern feminist politics and whatever. This guy is more of a Dr. Chilton, and
yes,
an oppressive figure. And I like the way Eggers is able to. The guy does represent that, the patriarchal oppression, but he doesn't have to be a mustache swirling malicious figure to do that.
He's still a good guy.
His intentions are good, and I think there's even an element of that same kind of thing to the Aaron Taylor Johnson Harding character.
To all the good guys. Everybody in this is a good guy except Orlok. But yeah, the Aaron Taylor Johnson character is like, he's doing his best, goddammit. He really is.
Yeah.
He's got a business to run. He's taking care of his family. I mean, the movie goes to great pains to show like he's a good husband, he's a good father, but he's ill-equipped. He's totally ill-equipped for the scenario that is going to sort of be saddled upon him.
Yeah, he's not. That's such an interesting thing, is giving him daughters that he loves too. He's not a misogynist.
No, he's good. Like when she tells him, "Why did you tie me up?" and he's just like, I mean, there's so many ways to play that scene, but for him, it's just like, because the fucking doctor told me to. I was supposed to. I was trying to help. God damn it.
Yeah, you were sleepwalking and possibly harming yourself. I mean, they don't. I don't know what the current diagnosis for sleepwalking is in that sense, but I imagine restraints are probably part of it. You don't just let them wander off walk into the sea.
All that stuff's really well done, though. Like every single character feels, like they're doing their best and trying really hard, and they're just outmatched by the situation. It's great.
Yeah, I mean, what a good bro.
Yeah,
not just like without hesitation. Oh yeah, I'll put up your wife at my house for 6 weeks while you're in Transylvania. It's like then all of her health problems just are taking over their entire lives and everything, and he's still not kicking her out until he like really pushes him to it. But yeah, I mean, I like the relationship with his wife. I think Emma Corrin's really good in this too. And I was really kind of
the kids though
put off and outraged, yes, by like the fates of that family in a way that we can get into if we really want to. But it's
upsetting. It's actually very upsetting.
It needs to be though.
Well, it's certainly the intention, but I mean, there's a little bit of like he's introduced being like, like, oh, you're doing so well, aren't you? It's like, yes, but it means nothing if I don't have the love of my wife and two adorable children. They're just the best. I love them so much. And they come in, they're like, oh, Daddy, you won't let a monster get us, will you? And that's like their only role in the film.
Yeah, I know that they are somehow they're these like twin, 5-year-old children who are 2 days from retirement. The entire movie.
What I think is important about how the movie handles Aaron Taylor Johnson's family and the kids and the wife is it needs to be kind of depressing and upsetting that this family gets wiped out, because I think you need that there to help justify the choice that Ellen makes. Like she needs to be confronted directly with what Orlok's evil is capable of. And I think it doesn't get any more direct than, seeing people she cares about sort of horrifically destroyed.
I mean, I think it felt fairly direct to me even before that. But I mean, I take your point. Like, yes, it does. It should be upsetting when the sympathetic characters die in a horror movie. I think but there's an element of this that really bugs me. And I think it's, as much as it's moral outrage, it's also just like the lawyerness coming out of me. And I could be like a rules nerd. And it offends me that there's like this elaborate thing of all this stuff of the steps he has to go through to possess the Ellen character. And she must give herself willingly, blah, 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 blah. And then these other people who are just standing around that are not chosen by destiny, he can't just totally walk in and slaughter them with no pomp and circumstance or any of this. And it in a way, it makes me less sympathetic to the main characters, where it's like, okay, but he can bring a plague to this whole city and slaughter these children offhand and kill his whole family and kill everybody else. But in a way, the character I'm supposed to sympathize the most with is the one who has the most protections from him, that he has to jump through the most hoops to get through.
Well, sure, but she is also the one who's just ends up being the ultimate target of his obsession and his attention, which you don't want that. That's going to you don't want to have sex with this thing at the end of the day.
No, but it seems like I would rather have that than to be one of the people who's not paying attention to, that he slaughters to prove a point to the one he is.
I suppose, but it's still the obvious central character. Sure. I mean, this goes to the Mina Harker thing. Has there ever been a version of this story that focused on the Mina character? I guess the Coppola one does, but that's that's the worst part of the movie. So aside from that, usually the focus is on Van Helsing. I think.
And the Coppola version leads into the reincarnated love aspect of it that I just totally don't buy. Like, whatever. And I guess that jumps us right to Lily Rose Depp, past some of the other guys. But if we want to stop off, look, Nicholas Hoult is great. We've sung his praises a few times on this show. So Lily Rose Depp, I have not seen her in anything before. She's very, very good in this. I'm still not entirely sure if she's a great actress, but it seems like maybe between this and the HBO show The Idol that she was on, maybe if she doesn't have a huge range, there's something that this young European model who was born into the entertainment industry has some sort of natural facility for playing like young ingenues whose youth and beauty are preyed upon by parasitic older men that want to possess and consume it.
I mean,
she's gotten in somehow.
I mean, I think that I think she's really quite incredible in this film. The physical component of her performance alone is, kind of remarkable, not just anyone can do that. But I think like equally important to the performance is just the kind of remarkable geometry of her face photographs incredibly well.
I was struggling with how to broach this like question of whether is she incredibly beautiful, or do I find her to be like an alien mantis creature, which is a question that sometimes comes up with Anya Taylor-Joy with me as well.
Originally, the role was supposed to be played by her. Actually.
Exactly,
that's right.
Yeah,
they have a very similar look.
Mm-hmm.
which I guess is European fashion model, or to a degree.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I believe that was Depp's wife, right? So it's a combination of European fashion model and quite noticeably Johnny Depp that you're looking at in this film. But it does capture the shadow incredibly well. There's profile shots. There's an image of her on a bed with like the shadow kind of like of the side of her face on the pillow that looks like a mountain range with the way it's been captured, because it's it's so pointy in certain places. It's just kind of an incredible face for a silent film.
Yes, this very broad forehead that those giant claws can cast their shadows over.
Yes, just as a piece of art direction, it's remarkable and really, really well used here. And yeah, she's game. She's doing crazy shit, and it's pretty fun to watch. Honestly, it's yeah, and yeah. I don't really think it's a sexy film exactly, but it's definitely a horny one.
No.
And
yeah, that's a very difficult line that performance is tasked to draw, and I was weirdly dismissive about it there, but I definitely went into this not expecting anything from her. Like, I knew her as, it's Johnny Depp's daughter, whose like first movie was the Kevin Smith movie that nobody actually watched, and then was on the HBO show that everybody hated, that I also didn't watch. I didn't expect anything out of her. Now like I said, I'm not convinced that she is an incredible acting talent, but I definitely have to give her a chance next time. Like, I'm not going to write off her next thing, or even if it's a difficult role.
Yeah, I agree. I was particularly impressed. I mean, maybe I had seen a passing clip of her somewhere, on YouTube, but I'd never seen her, quote unquote, acting or giving a performance. And obviously she's being helped by the script, which I think handles that character well. I've already sort of talked about how I feel about the Mina Harker-ness of Ellen. And she's being helped by Eggers, but I was very convinced by her performance, not just physically, but the emotional, psychological elements. I think she sells very well. And, the point about this isn't a sexy movie, but it's a horny movie. She conveys the sense of this desire within her, but also on top of that, the idea that she doesn't like this. She doesn't really want to be feeling like this, but she can't really fight it.
That's a tough line to walk. And yeah, that's maybe one of the hardest things this movie does successfully is that specific thing. I mean, it's helped by when you see what Orlok looks like, I suppose. But even still, like, she communicates both of it, all of it, kind of perfectly, which the movie really needs her to do. And she does. So yeah, I would say, I mean, just on her appearance alone, I think this is clearly somebody who's going to be have facility in movies. I mean, another Nepo kind of thing, obviously, but look.
Yeah, some are better than others. I think Dakota Johnson's really talented.
I mean, and there's something to be said that they are inheriting some of the traits that made their parents celebrities. Like, they are actually inheriting some of the things that you need to be movie stars here.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that I have. Again, see this, like, you talked about the script being doing a lot of favors here. Honestly, this is a very difficult role, and I think the weird thing is, though, even if you're nailing this, it's doing such a particular thing that I'm not sure that it means you can then go around and play a regular person in a romantic comedy or even a modern day set superhero movie. This is such a particular thing; it's almost closer to stage acting than whatever the next movie she gets cast in. That's more straightforward Hollywood fare would be.
Well, I do think there's room for actresses like this, though, that can play these kind of freaks. Mia Goth is kind of running the table on freaks like this right now, or Anya Taylor-Joy. Like Lily Rose Depp could do Furiosa type stuff, no question.
Yeah.
There's certainly roles for fucking weirdos, like this. It's great. Yeah.
I mean, again, I don't know that she's weird. I mean, she has to be, of course, but her parents are Johnny Depp, French fashion model. Of course, I'm sure she's a lunatic if I ever actually spoke to her. But whether she can play, as I said, I haven't seen her other stuff, so I don't know what her range is necessarily. Other than
True enough. I don't know if she can do a Natalie Portman rom-com. Yeah.
yeah. But she's really, really perfect for what this movie calls for, which, like you're getting into, is a really difficult thing. And the repression of that horniness is so central here, and the way that a more caricatured A24 thing would make the sort of, the repression of the sexuality, such like the ultimate and evil, that letting that go would be would be a positive expression in some way. And what Eggers, in his reconstructionist way, is more interested in is the sort of Victorian idea of, that repression's bad, but also letting it out could be bad too. And like making her the protagonist of this movie and sort of, ultimately responsible for destroying the monster. That doesn't necessarily, I don't know. Do you consider the ending of this movie empowering?
I feel like it's kind of fainting towards that, but not really.
I don't find the end of the movie as making some kind of grand thematic statement about feminism or femininity or anything like that. I think it's empowering for this specific character that she's able to take the situation into her own hands and, slay the demon, essentially.
Well, she is literally empowered to do it. She is the only person who was actually able to do it. So, she is in the unique position of having the option to end this, and no one else really can. Yeah.
What I like about Eggers' approach, just for novelty value, if nothing else, is that he is more interested in saying, that's not really a place you want to be in, though. That comes at a great cost. It's not a superhero movie.
You got to fuck this thing to death. It is an obligation
to your death.
Yeah.
And
oh man,
that is, it feels. This is one of the ways that this movie, it feels a lot like The Witch to me. Like it's playing in a lot of the same territory, and in part because the ending there can be read as some sort of feminist empowerment statement, but it also, to me, reads like much more ambivalent about that.
Yes,
about the empowerment aspect. There's also what I guess a more direct route, like the way that Orlok is presented in this is very similar to like how Black Phillip is presented at the end of The Witch. There's the whole sections in Transylvania where he's just sort of this figure with this like really deep booming voice, kind of stalking behind the protagonist in the foreground. That you don't get a great look at him. It's very much pulling from the same cinematic playbook.
Good point.
Man, we haven't really mentioned how incredible those opening sequences are of Hutter going
the Transylvania stuff.
The entirety of that, like honestly, from the moment he arrives in the small the Romani town, all through his stay at the castle is kind of just an unbelievably great segment of film. It's so fucking creepy. It's so cool. It's so well designed. It's great. Yeah.
Again, minus a couple of vampire brides, very, very Bram Stoker. That's very much how, at least it's the tone, it's the flavor you get from the Jonathan Harker chapters of Dracula for sure.
Nicholas Hoult, and I think he's wonderful in this.
He's a favorite of ours, right?
Right.
It's not just me.
I like him a lot.
We love him. We love him now. It's like at this point, like well documented that he's one of the best new talents out there. He's one of the most exciting new leading men in Hollywood. I expect another 20 years of starring in really interesting roles from him, or the rest of his life. I don't know, but like, he's going to be a cool Lex Luthor. I believe it.
I believe it too, but I feel like he may have somehow messed himself up, at least from the perspective of, say, Al Pacino's character in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. He indulged his character actor's side too early, and so he's missed out. And also, like, maybe his leading man shot was like Beast in X-Men First Class, with the character that didn't really pop from that franchise.
He's good in those. He's good Beast.
But he auditioned for Superman and got cast as Lex Luthor instead.
It's the better role. It's the better role.
Yeah, I'd rather be Lex Luthor.
His agent would rather he be Superman.
That's true.
I take your point. And you know what? That's maybe not a bad place to be, though. To be an interesting second lead is maybe the place you want to stay. honestly.
I think he'll be fine there. I'm only quibbling, I guess, about is he going to be the next big leading man? I don't know about.
Well, he can carry a movie. I don't think that's a problem. But he's sort of doing the Patrick Wilson thing. I think.
Yes.
I think he's kind of our new Patrick Wilson. I mean, this is certainly a Patrick Wilson role in Nosferatu.
Yeah, more than he's doing that Patrick Wilson more than the Clooney is my I guess assertion here.
Sure,
for sure.
I think of him as a successor to Brad Pitt, actually, in terms of having the leading man looks and then gradually revealing
weirdo taste.
He's a weirdo comedic actor at heart.
Yeah,
that's interesting. I don't know. I mean, Brad Pitt, you would not be like, okay, you're the guy that she sort of she loves but isn't as sexually attracted to as the corpse.
Yeah, you would never put Brad Pitt in the cuck role. And Holt maybe embraced that a little too readily and early. I mean, he was in another Dracula movie recently where he didn't play Dracula; he played Renfield.
Right. Yeah, I guess he's got to play Dracula now to get the hat trick.
That's true.
That'd be fun.
I mean, maybe when he's an elder statesman,
20 or 30 years. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because we don't need another Dracula movie for a very long time after this film, I would say.
That's true.
I think we nailed it for now.
I agree.
Yeah.
But that's not really dictated by whether we need them. It's more dictated by the fact that it's in public domain.
It's
Luc
true.
Besson's making one right now.
Oh yeah, that's gonna be the sexiest vampire, and I don't know. I mean, look, there's a place for sexy vampires, I suppose. I'm just not in the mood for it right now.
Yeah.
But mentioning that he could do his Van Helsing later when he's older, Willem Dafoe doing his Van Helsing. I'm not sure if I'm totally sold on this. Like, it's not bad because it's Dafoe being a weirdo, sold. A Victorian weirdo. But I don't know. It's exactly what I expected from that performance, I guess, in a weird way, for as odd as it is.
I think there's a little more restraint than I expected, honestly.
Not at the end, not in his final scene.
But that's the only point where he goes big. He builds up to that.
I think there's more humanism. Well, this is the thing. I think Willem Dafoe is an excellent actor that often gets forgotten because he plays, Green Goblins and such so often. The amount of pathos he can bring to that goblin, though, is kind of why he's great. Aside from all the incredible facial expressions he will pull. The fact that he, will communicate how deeply he cares about Ellen Hutter, in this, while doing this accent, while with that facial hair, with lines like the lines he has, that he's able to find a connection to the other people on screen with him, even as he's doing all this stuff, is kind of remarkable. And given that there's less Von Franz in this than I might want, he still kind of makes it all work. He still kind of feels like a very important character, despite having, less grandstanding scene chewing sequences than you would expect, like it's restrained compared to Anthony Hopkins in the Coppola film, for example, which is like they go the entire opposite way and just like, eat every scene, please, Anthony. He's like, I will do it. And this is a real guy, Von Franz. He's a blast too. He's a lot of fun.
But you're right. It's surprising how he's not in it as much as you might expect. And I think that's like directly related to there being more Dr. Sievers than you would necessarily think. And that comes at a cost.
I think that's very smart.
Bronze.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't mind it at all.
Mm-hmm.
I think what was a smart choice with how they characterize Von Franz here is that, yes, he ends up being the sort of archetypal vampire hunter. And yes, he's given a backstory of dealing with the occult, and, they bring up like Paracelsus and, they're name checking these strange guys from the, 17th century, 18th century. But there's an element that Dafoe brings here, and I don't know if this was in the script, but you feel that this is a kind man. Even in his weirdness, even in, moments where he might get wrapped up in, a little bit of mania over whatever subject, there's a sense of this is a decent and humane person who's trying to help people. And that's another element of Van Helsing from Stoker that very rarely gets translated into, at least in modern times, the Van Helsing characters in movies. Certainly, you don't get the sense from Anthony Hopkins and Bram Stoker's Dracula that he's this great humanitarian, with a lot of feeling for helping people. He's just this strange scientist. So I appreciated that.
Yeah, I mean,
I like that too.
He's more sympathetic and maybe a little more modern in the sensibilities and his approach to Ellen. that he comes in to say, cut that corset off of her. Don't.
He is the
stop,
guy with the modern
stop ethering her.
Yeah. He is the guy who can be like, this is bad, don't do this, which, I don't know the movie needed, but considering this is the big one for, the largest audience, it makes sense, and it's good to give those lines to Defoe.
Yeah, I mean, he's the modern guy, except he's still a committed alchemist. And in the final, I don't know. I guess I was not totally sold on his like sort of turn into pyro like mania at the end, where he's just cackling with glee in the flames in his final appearance.
Took me a second time to get watching this to get that he's stalling Nicholas Hoult. That's all that is.
Oh, I got that. I feel like that's the stuff they underlined with a bold mark that I wasn't sure they needed to, but I think like, that could have worked better as a reveal if we didn't like see what he was talking to Ellen about maybe on the steps.
Oh yeah,
he's like laying out. Here's
that could have been interesting.
Mm-hmm.
You play that scene on Nicholas Hoult watching them from afar, and we don't hear what their conversation is.
That felt more natural to me in terms of, but maybe I was just kind of hard for some sort of twist or mild surprise at this point because we're into the. We're doing all the beats. I mean, again, like I said, what else would the Robert Eggers approach to this be? It's not going to be thoroughly modernist or throwing wild curveballs in terms of the plot.
Right. Okay, so I think we've talked about most of the cast here, with one big exception, and that'd be Alexander Skarsgård.
Nope,
Bill Skarsgård as Count Orlok, and we're almost at an hour. I don't think the word mustache has been said once.
It's quite a mustache. I mean,
I was shocked. You want to talk about a surprise? That was my biggest surprise of the film, that he has a giant Dr. Robotnik mustache.
Yeah,
I love it. I think it's great. Most evil of mustaches. Yeah.
The impressive thing about to me was finding out that the voice was not really like heavily digitally modified. Right. Apparently he had Skarsgård work with an opera singer to lower his voice an entire octave, which is like, oh, that's that prime cut Eggers shit. That's what you want from him. We're going to light this by candlelight and use opera singers rather than auto-tune. That's what you want.
Mr. Bill Skarsgård is becoming quite the incredible character actor, right? At this point,
he's like the Boris Karloff of our time,
or the Lon Chaney. So. Yeah.
Except he's fucking beautiful enough to be. He could be Superman himself. Like, I don't know how we pigeonholed this guy into the drooling, rotting monster pigeonhole. But
he's so good at it. He's just the best at it. I mean, it's an incredible amount of commitment, and he's just so fucking good at it. Like, you put this performance next to Pennywise, and which it ended up being basically an iconic performance at this time. Like, for an entire generation, that's the clown. And there's no trace of him in either of those things. Like, if you see him in a normal movie, or as himself, it's just, you can't see him in these monsters at all. And that's tough. That's kind of amazing.
Yeah, even like Barbarian, which is not a normal movie by any stretch, but he's playing a human being with not buried under prosthetics and using a normal voice and all that, and it's remarkable. There, it's like, I don't know, it's weird. Like, you understand how Willem Dafoe could get typecast into playing Green Goblins and Max Schreck's in your Shadows of the Vampire or whatever. And I don't know how we settled on, well, this is the guy. This is the Andy Serkis of prosthetics.
That's funny. That's funny. The Andy Serkis of prosthetics. That's great.
I'd be right. It's such a different role from Pennywise, though. Like, voice, physicality, everything. That I don't even know how you get from here to there. Like,
yeah, that's the thing. Like, these are monsters that you don't see any of him in, but at the same time, they're very different from each other as well. Like, there's no Pennywise in Orlok and vice versa, and that's pretty cool. I mean, I do get the sense that this is the sort of role you research a lot, that you make very, very committed and informed choices about how you're going to play, especially working with Eggers. The mustache alone is, that's the result of a lot of decisions and a lot of thought and consideration. You don't just like, why not a big fucking Mario mustache? No, that comes from a place.
This stated rationale from Eggers I've seen in multiple interviews now is that he said, find me a painting of a Transylvanian nobleman from this time period that did not have a big honking mustache.
And also look at any portraits that were painted over the years of Vlad the Impaler.
Yes.
Yeah, they are going for Vlad here a little. The thing that I found really like that kind of unlocked the performance for me that I saw in an interview was Skarsgård saying that he wasn't playing as a vampire specifically, but more of an undead sorcerer. Mm-hmm. And that's really interesting distinction to make. And for some reason, I was like, it kind of clicked into place for me what a lot of his intention there is. And it's different, it's a different thing. The way this movie approaches vampires is different than what we've seen, despite being sort of prototypical Dracula stuff. And I think this is where the Dracula v. Nosferatu distinction comes in. I find it's very interesting that the main thing that they've taken out of the Dracula mythology from this is he can't make other vampires. There's no dark gift. There's no turning people into vampires. He just consumes life.
He is just appetite, as he says.
Yeah, just appetite. Yeah, there's no brides. I think Canuck believes he's going to be immortal or something, but there's no indication that exists anywhere other than in his brain. Like
he says he's going to be Prince of Rats.
Yes.
Well, the other stuff that he's going back to sort of actual vampire folklore, which was a lot less regimented than the post Hammer horror takes where there's silver and garlic and this and that. I mean, you see them hanging garlic in the windows in the Romani village or whatever, but it's not. They don't drink. He doesn't drink blood from the neck. He drinks blood from the chest, right from the source. Creepy.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, honestly, the biggest laugh I had in this movie was the cut to him drinking from Nicholas Hoult in front of the fire, where he's just sort of slowly dry humping him while he sucks on his chest.
Yeah, it's great. That's like good Eggers shit right there.
Yeah. Yeah. It just lingers on it 1 second longer than I expected, and that just really got me. But there's that, the idea that it's not wooden stakes; it's cold iron stakes they're going to use, and that I mean that's another thing that in some of these interviews I've seen Eggers expound about, that he's like drinking blood is not always even part of the vampire thing. If like in some of these Baltic areas, the vampire lore was more that they were like incubi that came to have sex with women in the night, and some of them it's more that they suffocated you to death because they were like sleep paralysis demons,
right?
That rest on your chest, and that's sort of what the humping, sucking on the chest thing is.
And the plague spreader, of course,
Yes.
he's a sort of a death bird, he just sort of follows in his wake. You don't get the sense that all the coffins in Wisberg are like direct victims of Orlok. Right. It's just he brings death with him. He's that incredible image from the trailer of his hand, the shadow of his hand covering the city.
Right.
It's just sort of it's it's the plague ship arrived, and that's old vampire lore too. Amped up a bit here. I think that's always a big deal in Nosferatu specifically, that he's a sort of a plague vector.
Yes. Much that's not really coming out of the Stoker novel. But it's a big part of the original Murnau Nosferatu. Lots of rat imagery.
Might even be a bigger part of the Herzog one, which is...
it is, for sure, yes. In fact, that's sort of
incredible, where...
There's that sequence where, like... Yes, the family is so like great. Having this lavish dinner, and there's these rats all around them.
Yeah, so good.
Well, the Murnau version came out a couple years after the Spanish flu epidemic in the 19 teens, and then this one came out a couple years after COVID. So it's an interesting linkage there, although it seems like Eggers is really resistant to say no, this was not meant to be a COVID movie. It was conceived of 10 years ago, to the extent it wasn't conceived of 150 years ago.
Eggers always shuts all that kind of stuff down. At least, we've talked about, I think we talked about it in the Elevated Horror episode. Like, he's not really interested in these kind of readings. Like, if people want to have them, fine. But like, that's not really part of his calculus when he's creating these movies. And I find that kind of refreshing.
I think that the fact that you can still have those readings and those allegories quite easily with this film, even though it's quite obviously not intentional as well, really speaks to its quality and to how well its themes are considered and how kind of universal the Dracula mythology really is. Like, in the January, the opening weeks of January 2025 here, it is kind of striking to watch a movie about, true evil kind of present and walking the world and taking over,
reawakened.
This sort of ancient rich man, who's basically just a real fucking piece of shit that spreads death and hatred and is consumed entirely by appetite, just sort of rising to power and crushing other people with it. None of that's intentional, but it's a little cathartic to watch, honestly.
Well, yeah, this can still be a COVID movie, but what he just doesn't want to articulate that and have it be just a COVID movie. It can contain all these other things, but he stays. I don't know. He keeps his eye on the prize, which is this is a monster movie about a vampire, and I'm interested in vampires. And what if vampires were real? And what if this was really a rotting, undead Transylvanian nobleman rather than a figure representing sexual liberation or something?
You don't think it'd be better if we had like a conversation about the efficacy of wearing masks or something in the middle?
Yeah, that'd be. There's one thing circling back to something we talked about earlier on, or touched on, was sort of like, is this the best Robert Eggers movie? Is this the worst Robert Eggers movie? And that is a difficult question. I think it's the most polished, perhaps, and complete product in some ways. I think I like the Witch hit me harder than this one, but if I had seen this one first, I would probably ding the Witch for a lot of the same things I'm dinging this for doing a lot of the same things, but slower and more obliquely. And in this way, he reminds me. He's starting to remind me more and more of Wes Anderson.
I get that.
Yeah. Not that their movies are similar in subject or anything, but they're just such singular craftsmen that they do this one thing that's really recognizable and fairly unique to themselves, to the point where I can't really imagine liking one of their movies and not liking the rest, or hating one movie. Like, it makes ranking them their movies feel very arbitrary.
I get that. And I think Wes Anderson actually is a very good comparison. In that, it would be very easy to accuse him of repeating himself and parodying himself if he weren't still kind of making very good movies that I thought worked and were solid and stood on their own. And I think, like, with a high degree of difficulty, Wes Anderson is still doing that, 10, 12 films in. I would say I like almost all of those movies a lot. And even the ones that I'm not a big fan of, I have affinity for the aesthetic and the Wes Anderson things that he does in them. I don't necessarily think that's a negative thing or a bad comparison. I would love a folkloric horror version of Wes Anderson out there. I would love if he had as prolific a career as Anderson does.
I think in particular in like way it makes rankings manifest as your Wes Anderson rankings and your Robert Eggers rankings are probably highly related to the order in which you see them. Which is not necessarily going to be the release order for everybody, but like I said, this and the Witch have so much commonality to them that I think whichever one you saw first is probably going to make the other one suffer a little bit.
I could see this one, Nosferatu, being one I rewatch more than the others, simply because it's a little less. I don't want to say intense because it's a pretty fucking intense thing. But it's a little less unwieldy, a little less esoteric.
Well, unique.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's it. It is the least unique Robert Eggers film because it's Dracula.
Right.
It is the most conventional, and it might just be that. It might just be that this is the one that is the easiest to appreciate on the surface as well as beyond. But it has just sort of a basic thing it does very well here that I don't need to be like, I'm not really feeling The Lighthouse tonight, it's I guess that's the other side of the pool, such as it is with Eggers. They're still pretty similar films.
I mean, the thing that strikes me, one, like, Yeah, right. It is really easy to mock Wes Anderson because his style and his things are so easily identifiable that even an AI bot can sort of ape them to a degree. But also, we're not awash in Wes Anderson imitators, which
True.
I think speaks to it being harder than it looks in some ways. And that's, I guess it depends what you think of as, to a certain extent, all A24 stuff is Robert Eggers imitators. You could characterize it that way. But he's the only one kind of doing this thing, this scrupulously, historically detailed horror, slow-paced horror thing. And if you don't like that, I understand. But I also don't know what you were doing at this movie.
Right.
Like, it's such a known thing by now. And it's also like, you could just not watch it, but why would you criticize it in terms of why would you want Wes Anderson making any other kind of movie than a Wes Anderson movie? Why would you want Robert Eggers doing anything else? Like, it's like Red Hot Chili Peppers, not for everybody, obviously. But am I going to say that like what you should be doing is doing like a Tom Petty style like roots rock album? Like, no, like dude, clearly you can only do this thing, this California gibberish funk rock thing.
Well said.
Wow.
No, you're right though. Like this is the thing. This is what we want him to do. This is what he should be doing. And yes, you're right. No one else seems to be quite able to get this right. Have there been actual imitations of this? Not even really.
Not really. Not,
I mean, I guess
the historical aspect intimidates horror people.
Yeah.
I think.
I got one. I mean, I don't know if we could ever prove that this was influenced by anything, but Osgood Perkins, Gretel and Hansel.
Oh, totally. That's exactly right.
Definitely
yes.
pulling from The Witch for sure.
I think that's Osgood Perkins' best film, and nowhere near as good as any Robert Eggers film.
Well,
I'm not
hope. There's hope for the monkey.
Yeah.
This is another thing that we can talk about. I guess a closing thought here. So what's next for Eggers? What do you want from him?
Well, the rumor and is that he's remaking the 1980s film Labyrinth. And
what?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would be much more interested if he were doing an original fantasy film that was going to involve the Jim Henson Company. I don't like him necessarily. I'm entering this universe that is already pre-established and is therefore going to bring visual expectations to it. I don't know that I like that, but the idea of an original fantasy film with Muppets or Muppet type, puppets, that would be interesting to me for sure.
I think for me, my anticipation of that's going to depend highly on whether it's a full blown remake or if it's supposed to be some sort of like reboot, cool legacy thing. Like
I heard it was
Jennifer
the latter.
Connelly comes back. Oh boy, that'd be really, really weird.
You can't do it without Bowie.
It doesn't sound quite right. I do like the idea of him doing a family fantasy film, though, like something for a younger audience, a dark fantasy for a younger audience with puppets. Sign me up for that. I'm interested. I really love Labyrinth too. I think it's kind of a fantastic film from the 80s, and I'm curious. Like if they were going to remake it, this would be an interesting guy to get to do it. It does have the same central relationship as Nosferatu, actually.
That's true.
If you're doing it, or if you're doing a remake, if it's not somehow
it's
a continuation.
Reboot, yeah. Oh no. Let's hope not. But that really doesn't seem like him. That seems like a very odd get if they were going to do a legacy.
He doesn't seem like a franchise or an IP guy. A big like a studio owned IP. He does not seem like the kind of guy who would be interested in that. But I guess you never know.
If he wants some money, if he wants some money, I don't know. I feel like he'd probably take a Star Wars film before that, but who knows?
I don't think so. I don't think they really want him for Star Wars. Even.
They'd be dumb if they wanted him for Star Wars, but they could.
But there's other IP stuff I wouldn't mind seeing him doing, actually. Like, I was just saying, I mean, honestly, Labyrinth may be even a better version of what my suggestion was. In the past, I think I cited him as like his version of Dune would have been interesting to see.
Certainly.
But if he just even see him remake something like the Duncan Jones Warcraft movie, it's just something like lighter and fictional, but like get just a Warhammer or Dragonlance something. Let him loose on something with intricate but an idiotic made up mythology. and let him loose on that with like his mindset, it could produce something interesting. Is my thing. Maybe okay, like fine. Maybe he's not going to do Final Fantasy. Maybe it'd be something like Viraconium or something that like is considered unfilmable. But something fantasy related. That's. I mean, I guess that's sort of the Northman.
I would like to see him a few movies down the road, like not immediately after this, but in 10 or 15 years, I would like to see his version of The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Because I think that's another book that has never really been done quite correctly in my view. And, you know, it's another period piece. I think he would do something interesting with that. But again, you don't want to follow Nosferatu with another classic horror literary adaptation. So you do that,
if
do
he
that
wants
3
to
or
do
4
it, I'm
movies
fine
down the
with it.
line. But, well, I mean, yeah, I'll watch whatever he does. But
Well, that's what I'm sort of like, you know, halfway facetious throwing out Dragonlance, but also like, here's something that who cares if he mangles it? And I think you might make an interesting. Like, what would like the dark, like grounded in weird ahistorical detail version of that would come out. Like I'd be interesting to see him do something a little more. I don't know. I guess Nosferatu is pretty pure fantasy in some that.
That would kind of be his, like, what would the Robert Eggers Dragon Slayer look like?
Yeah. Well, maybe that's more.
That sounds cool. I mean, any of that shit, I think, is a layup. Like this guy can kind of. There's a lot of stuff he could do, and I'd be very interested in it. You know, and then, I mean, honestly, anything with a monster, I'm down. I would be very interested to see him take on Lovecraft mythos. You know, maybe not a specific thing, but that vibe. I think
now it's a lighthouse. Like we're not taking
yes,
as far afield as we think.
Go more Lighthouse. I you know, farther in that direction. You know, honestly, like a spiritual sequel to the Lighthouse about the shadow over Innsmouth, maybe. Ooh, that'd be cool. Or maybe pure science fiction. You know, like one of those creepy fucking like space science fiction, Rendezvous with Rama type thing. You know, where you can't really rely on folklore. Or you have to invent it.
He would have been an interesting choice if they hadn't already turned it into a miniseries for The Terror.
He would have nailed the Terror.
But
he would have crushed that.
Yeah, yeah, it's a pretty good miniseries as is. But yeah,
it was good. Yeah,
I even kind of like the sequel one in the detention camp. But with science fiction, I think what I was getting at there, it'd be interesting to see him play in that. But it kind of has to be something with really intricate, detailed mythology for him to dig into. Like
some kind of folklore, some kind of ancient cultural kind of aspect.
I could see him doing a version of like a 2001 type movie and it really working, where there's a lot less, it's more ambiguous. Where, you know, we're seeing something like the monolith, but we don't know what the fuck it is, or whatever's going on in the beyond the Sea of Jupiter at the end. You know, that I could see him doing. You know, less something like Ender's Game. You know, I don't need to do something like that. Something weird and elliptical, though, I'd be very into.
His version of Foundation might have actually been really interesting.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's kind of a new thing for him to try. I think we'll get that at some point. I feel like he's got a sci-fi movie in him.
I hope so.
Maybe like him and like an Alex Garland and him work together on a sci-fi. I get it for that. That'd be cool.
All right. My repressed Victorian sexuality is starting to burst out of my corsets here. Really speaking to me. All right. Yeah. Whenever he does that, we'll have to convene. And
he's one of our guys, man. He's certainly at this point.
Yeah, he's the most exciting to me filmmaker working right now. I would have said Damien Chazelle was right up there, and then he made Babylon, so that dropped him down a peg for me. But Eggers is my number one guy right now.
I mean, I'm struggling to think of somebody else I would say. You know, like, but he's 4 for 4 for me in a big way. I'm kind of thrilled with this. Like, I was really anticipating Nosferatu, which is kind of a dangerous place to be in. You know, when you are very excited about a film and then to be satisfied by it pretty much completely, that's tough. And it doesn't often happen, you know. Between that and Dune this year, I think we kind of got very fortunate with some of our big films, and I mean, yeah, those two are kind of like sitting atop the year for me. as
Yeah,
sort of
same here.
the great cinema experiences I had. And yeah, can't wait for whatever's next. Hope it doesn't take too long.
All right, thanks, Brett. We'll speak to you again soon, I'm sure.
Thanks, guys. It was fun.